and welcome to Email Hacking and Financial Fraud, a webinar by LMG Security. My name is Natalie Adams, and I'm your moderator for today. Our presenters for the webinar today are Sherry Davidoff and Matt Durin. Sherry Davidoff is the CEO of LMG Security and author of Data Breaches. As a recognized expert in cybersecurity and data breach response, Sherry has been called a, quote, security badass by the New York Times. Her professional experiences are featured in the book Breaking and Entering, the extraordinary story of a hacker called Alien. Sherry is a GIAC certified forensic examiner and penetration tester, receiving her degree in computer science and electrical engineering from MIT. Her latest book, Ransomware Response, will be published early next year. Matt Durin is the Director of Response and Research at LMG Security. He is an instructor at the International Black Hat USA conference where he teaches data breaches. He regularly conducts cybersecurity webinars and seminars for hundreds of attendees in all sectors, including banking, retail, healthcare, government, and more. A seasoned forensics professional, Matt specializes in incident response, ransomware cases, cryptojacking, and banking Trojans. Matt holds a bachelor's degree in computer science from the University of Montana and previously worked as a blue team field technician and system administrator for over 10 years. His malware research was recently featured on NBC Nightly News. Sherry, at this time, I'm passing you and Matt control of the webinar.
Thanks so much, Natalie. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Email is one of those key resources that attackers are always targeting. Matt, want to fill us in on one of the latest big data breaches involving email?
Oh, of course. We were recently notified of an email system breach involving a U.S. defense contractor named Electronic Warfare. Now, they announced the breach on November 4th of this year, and as it turns out, on August 2nd, an unauthorized party gained access to their mail system. So this was an email system hack. They were able to gain access to sensitive data contained within mailboxes. And they did this for the purpose of financial fraud, or at least the investigation is stating that as the original motive behind the attack. However, in doing so, the actions of the adversary ended up inadvertently exposing the names, driver's license numbers, and social security numbers of a large number of clients for electronic warfare as a whole, meaning they did have to announce a data breach because of it. Now they're offering free credit monitoring with up to $1 million worth of coverage, but this really does underscore the fact that information in your inbox, information in your email is very valuable and can cause a lot of problems for you if it's accessed or exfiltrated from your environment.
Yes, and I think it was very interesting to find out that the criminals were just after financial data. They were looking to make a quick buck, even though they may have had access to all kinds of sensitive information, because that's what we see day in and day out when we're handling these business email compromise cases. So business email compromise is when hackers break into your email, and typically they're looking to monetize that. In fact, the FBI has reported that last year, criminals netted over $1.8 billion as a result of business email compromise attacks. That actually dwarfs the known cost of ransomware attacks. Even though ransomware is in the headlines, it's the hot topic. BEC attacks account for losses that are 64 times worse than ransomware, as you can see in the headline on the screen. So it is a huge problem, a quieter problem than ransomware, but an enormous one. So today we're going to talk about how the criminals actually monetize access to your email. We will walk you through a sting operation that we did here at LMG. We'll talk to you about how do you detect and respond to email hacking, how do you spot fraudulent emails that are often a component of the monetization piece, and then we'll talk about how you protect your accounts using strong authentication, strong passwords. We will leave you with a checklist for protecting yourself and your organization. So your email is powerful. It can be used for all kinds of things. In particular, you can use your email for resetting passwords for all of your other accounts. Your email is kind of the keys to the kingdom. If you need to get into somebody's social media, their bank account, their e-commerce sites, usually you can reset a password using email. Criminals can also use your email to send malicious messages to your contacts and get more victims. That's a little more obvious when it happens. Or they might just choose to break in and sell your password on the dark web. Sometimes that's the first stage of a longer term attack, where all they're doing is grabbing your password, which is valuable in and of itself, and selling that to others. They can also steal sensitive information from your email, like tax information, personal information, your social, birthdays, health information, you name it. Whatever's valuable to you is also valuable to the criminals. What you can also see on the screen here is an Amazon gift card checker. This is a tool that criminals buy, and then after they sift through your email, they might identify anything of value, including Amazon gift cards. And then they use this automated tool to go through and check tens, hundreds, thousands of Amazon gift cards all at once, see if they're still good, see what the balance is, and then they can resell them from there, or otherwise monetize them. So all of those are ways that criminals can get value from your email. However, none of these are the really big payoff. The big payoff and how criminals get big money from your email is through these wire transfer and payment scams. So I divide these up into 4 categories. These are the 4 most common types of scams that we see. The first one is an upcoming transaction scam, where they identify using your email some kind of payout, like a real estate transaction or an insurance payout that you're going to get, and they just try to transfer that money to a different location. We'll step through how they do this in just a couple minutes. You might also see a payroll redirect. These are very common, where they try to get an employee's payroll directed to a different bank account, and usually those aren't discovered until the employee starts wondering why they didn't get paid. There's also fraudulent vendor invoices, again, where the money is sent to a different location, and then emails that look like they come from executives but don't. So let's jump into one of the upcoming real estate transaction cases. These are super common. If you are buying a house or closing on any other kind of real estate, you are at risk of falling victim to one of these attacks. So this couple was about to purchase a home for about $950,000, and they received the final instructions for wiring the money to the mortgage company. So they did that, and then a couple days later, they found out that the payment was never received. It's amazing that it took like 2 or 3 days to find out about that, because that's a large sum of money to not say anything about. When they started tracking this down, they found out that the money had actually gone to a wrong location because the instructions they received were fraudulent. The document they were working off of had an account that actually belonged to an attacker. And what happened was that somebody's email must have gotten hacked. Maybe it was the buyer's email, maybe it was their agent's email, the seller, the attorney, the mortgage company, the title company. There's all kinds of people that have a role to play in an upcoming transaction. Somehow the scammers found out about the total cost, the closing amount. They found out about the timing, who the buyers were going to be, and then at exactly the right moment, they sent a fake email that looked like it came from a party in the transaction, but really came from the scammer, and it had fake account information. So that's how money gets lost. Again, it's just a message that comes at the right time. Sometimes it doesn't even come from a valid, like an email address of a person in the chain, but it looks like it does. And in this case, fortunately, they were able to claw that money back, but that is pretty unusual. Much of the time that money is just out the door. There was another case involving a law firm in New Jersey, and this just goes to show you how it can affect clients and third parties that you may serve. In this case, the law firm was hacked. An attorney's email was being monitored by the criminals. They saw there was an upcoming real estate transaction, same thing, and the criminals created a fake wire transfer document and managed to steal $560,000. And the only reason we know about this is because the criminal was based in California. Not a good idea doing this domestically. So they were apprehended and brought to justice. So one of those good cases where we actually see the criminals getting apprehended so that they can't do this again. Payroll redirect cases are also very common. In one case that we saw, there was an organization that got a request over email to change the payroll account information from an employee. And a lot of times this is even accompanied by paperwork. Remember, if they have access to your employees' emails, they might be, or to SharePoint or something like that, they might be able to get a sample direct deposit change form if you have one of those, or they might simply email and make a request. So in this case, the HR department did not confirm the change separately with the employee. They just changed the direct deposit info, and voila, on payday, the employee did not get their paycheck followed up, and it turns out that money went to a hacker. In this case, they contacted the bank to try to recover the funds, but unfortunately those funds were gone, $5,000. So the last type of fake email we often see is coming from executives, and this is a super common type of scam. This is an example that the FBI shared a few years ago. And I'll show you how it has evolved and gotten more sophisticated over time. But for a while, finance clerks in particular and HR departments were just getting bombarded by messages like this: a request from the CEO or a request from the CFO. And it says it's marked as high importance, and it says, please process a wire transfer payment in the amount of $250,000 and code to admin expenses by close of business today. Wiring instructions below. So that's very straightforward. Again, it looks like it comes from an executive, and staff will often receive those and process them. So over the past few years, people have gotten wise and have learned to resist these. So the criminals, of course, have gotten more sophisticated, as they always do. Here's one example of a modern business email compromise scam where the criminals are trying to monetize their access. And in this case, they've been lurking for a long time, monitoring the emails, figuring out who's who in the organization, and they send a message that looks like it comes from an executive. It goes to somebody who has the ability to transfer money within the organization. So they say, I've just had some news from our attorneys confirming that we're in the final stages of completing a very important acquisition for the company. Having been privately negotiating this acquisition for a number of months, it's great news we're finally so close to closing. And then they ask, I will need you to make a wire payment today in the form of a deposit for the acquisition. Use this email as my full approval for this and any additional wires that may be required in the coming days. And then they go on to say that the acquisition needs to remain private. You will be hearing from an attorney that you've never talked to before, John Jones, to negotiate the payment. So they're really setting this up for the transfer of not just one wire payment, but possibly multiple. And we often find if one person in the organization makes a wire transfer, they can often be talked into making follow-on wire transfers as well. So the criminals might start with 5 or 10 and 20, 40, and go up from there. All right, these business email compromise attacks may also be conducted in multiple stages. So here's one where an organization had their email hacked and knew what they were looking for, knew what type of business it was, and then used that to identify who key personnel were in the organization. And then they sent a message to one that said, I need you to email me an up-to-date aging report from AR and also include customer payable contact email. So if you are in finance, this might not trigger any red flags. You're not being asked to send money. It doesn't sound that sensitive. What's the criminal actually trying to do here, though? Well, they want to follow up and send and tell each of these customers that are supposed to pay you that instead they should transfer the money to a different location. Hey, we've updated our bank account information. So really in this case, they need to get that information and then they can target your customers. It's really sneaky. All right, let's jump in and actually step through a fraudulent vendor invoice case. So this was one that I actually heard about from the bank. I went to lunch with my colleague who's a high-level bank executive, and he said, oh man, it's been a tough day. And I was like, why, what's going on? And he said, I just got a call from a customer this morning that said they were missing $900,000. They had transferred the money to a vendor. They made these high-dollar wire transfers all the time. It was part of their business model, and the vendor never received it. And so he had immediately asked the business, how did you verify the bank account where this money was going? And they said, well, we got instructions over email. And at that point, he basically hung up on them. And he traced the money, figured out where it was going, and found out that, found the bank branch that it was in a totally different bank. And it turned out that someone was in that bank branch right at that moment trying to withdraw the funds. So if he had waited like 45 minutes, that money might have been out the door, or at least a good chunk of it. And fortunately, in this case, they were able to freeze those assets. And in fact, the criminal was apprehended. Very, very unusual case. I found it very dramatic. But you can see that timing is everything, and criminals have this down to a business. So at LMG, again, we think a picture is worth 1,000 words and a video is worth 1,000,000. So I'm going to step you through an actual sting operation. We wanted to see the criminals in action. So we set up a fake company. This is hackable.com. They're a professional services firm. They have two partners, Will Hack and Owen Abel. And they have a new billing clerk named Sue Septible. She's very susceptible because she's new. Now, Hackable works with a vendor called Trusted Office Solutions, Inc. They purchase their office furniture from there, and they're often exchanging money. And Trusted Office Solutions, Inc. has a billing clerk named Nora, who they like to work with. So this is all a story. It's not real, obviously. But we created an Office 365 account for them. And we seeded it with all kinds of juicy information. So here you can see, this is Sue Septible's account. We put in W-9 forms, we put in a business handbook, we put in W-4s. We made it look totally legit for the hacker, who we hoped would be coming into the system. And then we decided to send a sample phishing email to Sue Septible. And the email template we chose was from DocuSign. We had actually just seen this in a case. So DocuSign, of course, kind of trains everybody to click on links in phishing emails, right? And who uses DocuSign? Do you use DocuSign? Typically, it's used by executives, finance folks, anybody with contract signing authority within your organization, exactly the kind of people that the hackers want to target. So the other reason that hackers often brand phishing emails with DocuSign is because DocuSign was hacked a few years ago. There was this huge surge in phishing emails that included the DocuSign branding. And that was in part because they were hacked and their customer email addresses were stolen. Now, they reassured everybody there were no credit card numbers stolen, no sensitive information stolen. But as we'll see throughout this presentation, simply having your email address can make you much, much more vulnerable, especially if they know that you use a particular service or product. So it's pretty much a recipe for disaster. They have the list of people that use DocuSign. They send DocuSign branded phishing emails to those users and get them to click on links, which in turn infects their computer or steals their passwords. So let's see how this works. We're going to walk through it. So Sue Septible gets this email. And again, this is modeled after a real email that we saw in a case. It says, completed, wire transfer document ready for signature. And how can you tell that this isn't legitimate? Well, first of all, the from address isn't a DocuSign.com address. It is no reply DocuSign at yahoo.com. Who can open up a Yahoo account? Anybody. All of us can. So you can't really trust that email. Also, if you hover your mouse over that link, do not click it. If you hover your mouse, you can see where it really goes. And it goes to this long, weird URL. It's probably some company out there in the real world that got hacked, actually. So let's say Sue Septible, because she's very susceptible, she clicks on this link. And it takes her to the site you see here. Now, again, this was a very common format for cybercriminal websites. It's branded to look like DocuSign, send, sign, and approve documents. And it tells you, if you want to look at this document, select your email provider. You need to give them your Office 365 password or your Gmail password, or actually they'll take any other password you want to put in there. It doesn't matter. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Okay, so Sue clicks Office 365 because, like many of us, she uses Office 365. And she types in her username, she types in her password. Now again, this is a fake website. This is a real phishing website. We were so excited to have found this. So how could she tell that? Well, first you look at the URL, it's long, it's weird. Also, it says not secure. If it says not secure, it is not secure. If it says secure, can you trust it? Not necessarily, but for sure, if it says not secure, do not trust it. Run, don't walk. So she types in her username and password, and she gets this response. Wrong password, try again. And when I say she, I mean Matt, because Matt was actually sitting at the keyboard. Hello, Sue. So Sue, what was actually happening here?
So we talked about this a little bit, and we were curious why it would tell us wrong password and not redirect us somewhere else. The conclusion that we came to was the website was actually designed to prompt us for wrong password 4 or 5 times in a row And think about that for a second. Why would they do that? Well, what happens if you go to a website and you enter a password that you think is correct and it tells you the password is wrong? Well, you might think, well, maybe this is the variation of my password where I put a 1 on the end, or where I replaced an A with an @ symbol, or where I used my old password that I used for other services. So by the time this is all said and done, they have now compromised multiple passwords for each individual user, and they can use those to stuff out to websites all over the internet and see if they can compromise you a little bit further.
Yeah, it's very sneaky. So at this point, we've typed in a bunch of passwords, including Sue's Office 365 password, and we're waiting. I was so excited. I was like, Matt, have they broken in yet? Have they broken in? And it was like, no, they haven't broken in yet. And then boom, we got hacked. I was so excited. They broke into our Office 365 account and they started looking around. So the attackers logged in. They logged in, they used the stolen username and password, and they did that right away, like within just a few hours. I was antsy, but honestly, they got right on that. And they searched for invoices. Good news. We had planted a fake invoice in there, hoping that they would see it. So the invoice comes from Nora Chen, and it says, "Hi, Sue. Please see the attached invoice and confirm receipt. Let me know if you have any questions." Yes. And here's what the invoice looked like. It had obviously the logo, Trusted Office Solutions, and then it had their banking information right up there, very clear, just waiting to be stolen. And obviously this is not a real account number or a routing number because we didn't really want to get hacked, but we tried to make it look legit. So the first thing the criminals did was they deleted that invoice. They deleted that message right away because they didn't want the real susceptible to see it. So they delete it, boom, it goes into the deleted items where she's not going to see it. So then we waited. I was like, what else are they going to do? And I don't know, Matt, if you remember, I was bugging you like at the end of the day, hey, did they log in yet? Like, nope, nothing happened. Okay, so then we look Saturday, nothing happens. All right, that's fine. Maybe they're taking the weekend off. Hackers need time off too, spend time with their families. Sunday, nothing happens. I was sure something would happen on Monday, but we got nothing. Now, it turned out Monday was MLK Day in the United States, a national holiday, but I didn't think the attackers would really track on that. And by the end of this day, I was like, man, we are on a deadline. Maybe we should restart and see if we could get some other criminals to hack us. But first thing Tuesday morning, boom, we got an email from the hackers. I was so excited. The email looked like it came from Nora Chen, and although it didn't, it said, "Hi, Sue. Just a quick notification to let you know our bank account is currently under review and can't be used to receive funds. I've attached the final invoice. Please, can you transfer the funds into our subsidiary bank details on the new invoice? Kindly let me know if the payment will be made today. Your urgent response would be highly appreciated." So let's analyze this a little bit. First of all, they are tracking on the timing. They had this right out as soon as the business day began on Tuesday after the national holiday in the United States. And they had deleted the previous invoice, sent this one so that susceptible would see this one for sure instead of the old one. And then they've also created a sense of urgency. Your urgent response would be highly appreciated. All right, and this is someone, think about it from susceptible's perspective. This is someone that susceptible is expecting an invoice from, who she works with on a regular basis. It's no wonder that business email compromise has become an epidemic because this makes sense. The invoice, the fake invoice, looked just like the real invoice. You can see that they copied it exactly. The only thing they did was they changed the banking information. In fact, they even used the same bank. They just updated that account number, the routing number, the beneficiary. They included more information because apparently we didn't include enough for them to actually make a wire transfer reliably. So they added more, which was helpful. Now, much of the time at this stage, we see email forwarding happening as well. It didn't happen in this case, but I just wanted you to be aware that often criminals at this point will start forwarding your emails off to a Gmail address. And Matt, I know you see this all the time in cases, correct?
Yeah, this is a really, really common tactic that we see. It allows them to basically monitor all of your conversations without having to log back into your account and potentially set off red flags.
Yeah, so check this. We had a case last year where it turned out that forwarding had been happening for 6 months. And so, boom, 6 months of emails were all going to an attacker. There's nothing you can do about that. The other thing they do is they set up mail rules. And in this case, the criminals set up a mail rule that meant any emails that came from Trusted Office Solutions, the real Trusted Office Solutions, were immediately sent to the archive. And you can see that right here. So if Nora Chen follows up and says, "Hey, I didn't receive the payment," Susceptible is not going to see that. It's going to go right to the archive. And that's going to help buy the criminals time, because otherwise Sue might say, I'm going to look into that. That's weird. I sent the payment. But instead, Sue hears nothing. All those emails are just go into the archive where they can't be seen. So we also sent a follow-up email from the fake Nora Chen, just checking on the invoice to see if the criminals would do anything. And it turned out they did. We got a follow-up email from the hackers the next day. They copied our email. So here's the real email on the left. And then Nora Chen, the fake Nora Chen, said, "Hi, Sue. Just following up on the invoice I sent yesterday. Could you please confirm payment? Thank you for your business. We'll be looking forward to your email." So very nice, polite, no spelling errors or anything like that. Not a whole lot that could trip an alarm bell. All right, so if you're like me, you're wondering, where are these criminals? Who are they? It turned out we were able to get an IP address from the email. And that IP address came out of Lagos, Nigeria. And this really matched what we were seeing in terms of the criminals' strategies in general. We were seeing a lot of business email compromise cases initiating from Nigeria at that time. It really seemed like it was a business, like it was an organized crime group that had employees. Who knows, maybe they were working on commission, but there was a lot of activity coming out of Nigeria at that time. So to recap, the criminals are using your stolen passwords to break into your email or the email of somebody that you correspond with. And then they're going to search for any upcoming transactions or payments or other things that might be useful for them. If they want, they're going to steal data as they go along. They're going to add mail forwarding rules or mail filtering rules. And then they're going to monetize it. They're going to send a fake invoice or fake wire transfer requests and sit back and profit. So Matt, why don't you fill us in on how this has evolved over time?
Of course. So the tactics that the attacker was using in our sting operation were not unique. The name of the game for a lot of these attacks is the amount of time they are able to spend in the account without being detected. Because the more time they have, the more time they have to spot financial transactions coming through or sensitive information moving back and forth. And this has become basically just the standard operating procedure. The big thing that attackers want to do is lurk. And we see that now with a lot of the more online-based services like Office 365. Especially since most of these are services that a lot of businesses have now moved into instead of using on-premise Exchange. Mandiant at Black Hat this year called Microsoft Office 365 the holy grail for nation-state hackers. And we got to hear a large group of incident responders like myself go through and talk about the tactics that we're seeing adversaries use in order to really maximize that time they're able to dwell inside the accounts. First and foremost, they're starting to move their login locations away from those big red flag areas that we've seen. Now, in our sting operation, they logged in from Lagos, Nigeria, which for any IT admin is going to be a big red flag. That's an impossible travel alert. Microsoft can key in on that pretty easily, so that's going to be a pretty surefire way they're going to get themselves busted. Lately, we're seeing attackers utilize tactics like logging in using a virtual private server somewhere inside the United States, sometimes even within the same city that the organization they're attacking is doing their business. It makes it a lot harder to spot. Remote workers are also a lot more vulnerable, mainly because they're operating on their own time. They may be using their own devices and equipment. It may not be monitored by the IT or security staff of their organization or have adequate antivirus software. So again, they're being targeted more often than not. And new employees are also targeted because they're not familiar with how things actually function inside the organization. If they start getting emails from a potentially unfamiliar person, they may not know enough about the staff to recognize that as a potential phish coming through. So how else are attackers maximizing their time inside the accounts? Well, first off, a pretty heavy-handed approach that we've seen them take in a couple of different instances is simply turning off audit logging inside of your Office 365 tenant or inside your mail tenant. Now remember, audit logging is where the wealth of information we can use to verify whether or not an account has been compromised lies. If we don't have audit logging, we can't really tell much about what happened inside of that account. So if an attacker is able to get in and just completely disable that logging, we are now blind to the activities that are being undertaken. We can't see where they're logging in from. We can't see where they're forwarding the emails out to. It becomes pretty tough to spot. Now, a savvy IT person's probably going to notice that audit logging has been disabled. So again, this is one of the more heavy-handed tactics. And all the admin has to do at this point is just re-enable logging, and they can get that visibility back into the system. However, Attackers understand that that's a pretty easy thing to fix. So there are some other tactics they've been using to maximize their kind of level of clandestine access into an account without setting off those same kind of alarm bells. First off, they're using license downgrades to remove the advanced logging features from some Office 365 tenants, or the availability to see them. If you downgrade from E5 to E3, you remove artifacts like the mail items accessed artifact, so we can't see what they're looking at while they're inside the tenant. We also remove some additional security features at that point. And for those that are specifically advanced, they'll use something like a PowerShell commandlet to stop audit logging for only certain individual accounts within the organization. If only one account is not being logged, there's a really good chance that an admin's not going to notice that, or they're not going to notice it right away. This, again, goes towards that effective long-term lurking inside the account. Now, there are some other evolving techniques that are being basically exercised at this point. The seeing them a little bit more prominently. Things like a multi-tenant attack or an application attack. We also refer to this as consent phishing from time to time. This is the tactic of an attacker using an application to access the account instead of using a username and password. And these are sneaky, and they're kind of hard to detect. This will also mean that a username and password reset may not actually stop access because the attacker's using an API key. It can also bypass multi-factor authentication. So there's a lot of things to watch out for in terms of keeping your account safe in this kind of more modern phishing environment that we live in. So how do we defend against these kind of attacks? How do we keep our tenants safe, and how do we keep ourselves from falling victim to this? Well, there's a few things that we can do. First off, automated notifications for configuration changes and things like Office 365 and G Suite can be a lifesaver. If you start seeing things like license upgrades and downgrades and you get alerts for those, you may get an early heads up that something's wrong in the account before it blows up into a potentially $1 million loss for an organization. Also, reviewing accounts periodically can be very helpful. If you understand what normal looks like for your organization, you can spot abnormal activity pretty easily through a very simple style of account review. Active monitoring and logging is also very advisable. We want to make sure we're keeping an eye on those accounts and we understand what's happening with them on kind of a day-to-day basis. Overall, tenant configuration reviews are also very handy, so we make sure we're up to date on security features. And then proactive threat hunting. Most people don't think of threat hunting when we talk about email tenants, but this is something that can be very useful. It's recognizing those very subtle indicators of compromise that might not trigger an automated alert that can, again, give you that heads up that something's wrong in the account before it blows up in your face.
Yeah, and more recently, we've also seen a shift in where the adversaries are located. So again, it used to be the case a lot of this activity was coming out of Nigeria. In the past year or two, we've seen a shift where Russian cybercriminal gangs are starting to target your email as well. And that is bad news because the Russian cybercriminal gangs tend to be very well funded. They operate like businesses. They have been engaged in financial fraud for well over a decade, and they're ramping up. So what you're seeing on the screen here is an example of that, where a Russian-based cybercriminal organization known as Cosmic Links, among defenders, was lurking in an organization system for quite some time, got to know who's who, mapped out the organization, understood what the ongoing conversations were about. And then when they were ready, they emailed Cheryl. Cheryl was someone with access to transfer funds for the organization. So it looked to her like the CEO emailed her and said, there is a time-sensitive corporate matter that needs to be resolved with our appointed law firm by the close of this week. I would like to entrust it to you. And Cheryl thinks, oh, I'm being entrusted. And clearly it's secret, so I'm not going to tell anybody. Please let me know soonest by email if you can handle this, and I will fill you in on the details. All right, so we've got that sense of urgency, soonest, and it needs to be done by email. Why? Well, because the criminals don't want Cheryl calling up the CEO or whoever is looks like they're sending this email. So you often see encouragement to only contact the sender by email. I'm out of the office, or whatever excuse needs to be made. And then what's going to happen? Well, on the next phase, they're going to convince Cheryl, of course, to make some wire transfers, possibly just one, possibly follow-up ones if she makes the first one. And of course, it's all going to be very private, and so she's not going to tell anybody about it. The hacker's goal is to make sure that this funds transfer doesn't get caught, at least until they have the cash. So what can you do to protect against this? Well, first of all, I would highly recommend training everybody in your organization to do out-of-band verification, especially if they're asked by email to do things like change the bank account that money is being sent to. Any kind of change like that, a request for wire transfer, a request for financial data. We also often see criminals targeting assistants or managers and asking them to buy gift cards as a bonus for employees. In fact, that's a common scam that we see around the holiday season. So be careful, and then they'll end up sending the gift card numbers to the attacker. So all employees in your organization really need to be trained to do this. You want to always verify using a second method of communication, so either phone or Zoom or face-to-face, but not using email. At LMG, we do social engineering testing, and when we send phishing emails, often we get responses to those from employees that say, is this a scam or is this legitimate? And what's the criminal going to say? Of course it's legitimate. Yes, go ahead. And also sometimes the criminals will include numbers in there that go back to the criminals or that go to a Google Voice number that they control. So it's really important for everybody to use numbers that you already have on file in your organization, not anything that's in the email. Okay, also think about your relationship with your banking institution. And if you are a banking institution, think about how you work with customers. Here's one case where there was an organization's email account was compromised for months. The hackers were lurking in there, intercepting emails, and the hackers figured out who the bank was. And they contacted the bank and attempted to add a new controller to the bank account. So, hey, we want to add this additional person. And they were successful. The bank confirmed that they could do this. They added the new person. And then this new employee sent forged documents to get a wire transfer put through for $980,000. And this was successful because they were authorized on the account. So think about, again, how you work with your bank, who's authorized to be added, and who you work with there on a regular basis so that this gets caught. All right, so in addition to having money stolen, you may also suffer from a potential data breach. And often this is just you getting hit with the shrapnel of this attack. So criminals are breaking into your email. They might just be looking for financial information, but in the process, they might sync that whole email inbox or search for lots of other stuff. And once the whole email inbox is gone, well, that data has been stolen and you may be in violation of some security breach laws, or you may be required to notify as a result of that. So then this also triggers a breach investigation, which is the last thing you need when you're already dealing with financial fraud. So think for a second about what is in your email. You might think, hey, our organization has a policy. We're not supposed to have sensitive information in email, but as a penetration tester, I guarantee you your email has all kinds of juicy information. If you are a bank, you have bank account numbers in there. You have customer financial details. You have tax information. Even if your employees are told do not transfer sensitive information over email, you can't stop your customers or your members from doing that. They will send you stuff, like it or not, and you have to get used to getting that out of your email. If you are a healthcare organization, you have patient health information in your email. I guarantee you, I've broken it into enough hospitals to tell you for certainty it's in there, like it or not. So your email server is really valuable, really sensitive, and it's just something to be aware of. Sometimes information that we don't even think hackers might want is actually valuable to them. So keep in mind, if your data is valuable to you or a person you serve, it's also worth money to somebody else. Here are some good examples of that. So there have been quite a few high-profile cases that happened because of business email compromise. One of them is the Sony case from several years ago. In fact, I'd say that was the first major email catastrophe, which resulted in executives actually stepping down from the organization, Amy Pascal, because there was so much embarrassing information in there. If you don't want it to be stolen, don't put it in email. That's just a good rule of thumb. Deloitte was hit by a cyber attack. Client information was stolen. It was their emails. There have also been cases where where pharmacies or mental health clinics had sensitive information in email, and that went out the door. One of the quickest ways for you to reduce your risk and the cost associated with any email hack is to set a retention limit. So if an email is older than 1 or 2 years, it automatically gets deleted. I know that might sound scary. We all like to hang on to sensitive information just in case, but remember, as we've talked about in the past, sensitive data is hazardous material, and you don't really want uranium lying around forever. I have retention time on my own email, and I can tell you every once in a while I'm like, oh man, I wish I had that email from 3 years ago, but 99.99% of the time I never even think about it, and it can dramatically reduce your risk. Okay, so a common question we get is, how can you tell if your email's been hacked? Well, one really obvious way that most people find out is that all of a sudden there's emails coming from your account that you didn't send. Your friends, your colleagues start to come to you and say, Evil Matt, why did you send us that message? It's so weird. Or if you want to look at some more subtle cues, there might be unexpected mail rules. That's an early indicator that you and your IT team should be aware of. Or new folders or messages marked as read that weren't being read. If anybody ever talks to you and says, yeah, it's really weird, I log into my email and my messages are read, but I didn't read them, I must be going crazy. No, you jump on that right away, because there's a really good chance that your email's been hacked. Also, if there are scammers targeting you, like calling you or emailing you, and they seem to have some inside information, think about where they might have gotten that information, because often it comes from a hacked email. And it's really important to pay attention to notifications, as Matt alluded to earlier. We can notify about configuration changes, but often people aren't watching those notifications. And Microsoft doesn't always make it easy. Here's one that says a low severity alert has been triggered. So already I'm like, all right, I'm deleting that, right? No, pay attention to this, because this says mail has been redirected. All of a sudden, emails from users are being sent to some third-party account. And that might sound innocuous from the header, but in reality, you don't want that. So you guys need to be paying attention to this when it pops up. So make sure that you're getting alerts, that they're being marked appropriately. This should really be setting off some alarm bells, and that you have folks who are watching and responding to them. Okay, another question we get is, what should I do when I suspect an email has been hacked? Well, if you think your email's been hacked, respond right away. Do not wait. Step 1 is to lock out the hackers, so change your password and enable two-factor authentication. It's super important to do both of those things. Obviously, changing your password is usually quick and easy, and you want to change it to something you have never used before. But second, enabling two-factor authentication makes it so that even if the criminals have infected your computer, they've stolen that new password, they might still not be able to log in. So enable 2FA if you haven't already. We'll talk about that more in a couple minutes. Matt, do you want to talk about killing active sessions? I know that comes up in your cases quite a bit.
Yeah, this one comes up pretty frequently. So when you, in a lot of modern email clients, if you sign in through a web browser, you can click on an option to remember or trust the device that you're using to log in. And a lot of times that means it'll allow you to log back in using a token instead of a username and password. If the attacker has a valid token, even if you change the password, they still may be able to, for a little while anyway, re-access that account. So killing those active sessions is kind of the final boot out the door to make sure that there's nobody lurking inside the account for any longer.
Yep, exactly. You also want to make sure to preserve evidence right away. So if you are in an IT role, take these steps for yourself. If you're not, talk to IT when you need to do this. So that means download logs right away. Logs are just a record of activity, and that can show you where the hackers might be coming from, how long they've been in there. Also, place a litigation hold on your affected accounts. You can see in the screenshot how we did that on Sue Septible's account. And that just means that emails can't be deleted or removed from the account. That's really important because the criminals might be trying to remove evidence that they've been in the account, and you want to make sure that you're retaining a copy of that. And activate your breach response. If someone's been in your email, don't wave it off. There may be legal obligations. You may have additional risk, so make sure you're responding properly. Okay, another question that I've gotten a lot is, okay, what do I do if somebody else's email's been hacked? How many of you have ever gotten an email from somebody else that looks like it's a phishing email or it came from a hacked account? Yeah, this is just our opportunity to stretch today. Yep. So here's one that I got. It was, please don't open. This was not sent from me. This was a follow-up from the user. I'm not sure what happened. Okay, I'm pretty sure what happened. The person's email account had gotten hacked. So step one, don't correspond with the email. Don't respond and say, I think your email was hacked, because the hackers will see that and they'll delete it, and then you'll be on their target list. They know you have an active account now too. So instead, it's polite to let the user know right away so they can take steps right away. Don't assume somebody else is notifying them. Let them know by phone, by text, not using email. And then remember that your information may have been stolen in the process. If you've corresponded with them, if you've ever sent them a document or any other sensitive information, you should assume that that's gone out the door. And most of us like to, pretend that might not have happened, but if somebody else's email account has gotten hacked, it's very likely that your information could have been stolen as well. So if necessary, talk to IT, talk to security, look at the types of information you exchange with them, and follow up. All right, now we're going to step through a few examples of fake emails that we often see associated with business email compromise and financial fraud attacks. So one of the first, let's take a look at this email from here. It's from what looks like an executive, and the executive is saying, hi Mary, could you do me a favor? There's a pending invoice from one of our providers because I'm out of the office. I need you to take care of it because I can't access the accounts from here. Whoa, John, that's a run-on sentence. That's setting off a red flag for me, but we're all human. Okay, the deadline is today, so make it a high priority. This is a real email, by the way, from an attacker, so that's why it's not perfect. The deadline is today, so make it a high priority. So again, you see that sense of urgency. They want people doing this fast before they have a chance to think. So how do we know this is fake? Well, number one, be aware that the from address is not always an accurate indicator of where an email actually came from, right? This looks like it came from John Knotz's account. Does that mean John Knotz's email has been hacked? Not necessarily. Because the from address is kind of like the return address on a letter. When you look at it, 9 times out of 10, it's correct. It indicates where the letter actually came from, but anybody can fake that from address. I could write, I am Frank Quinn from Beasley, and send you a letter, and you'd be like, oh, cool. But in reality, it's from me, the attacker. So the from email address can give you some clues, but it is not a guarantee that that's where an email actually came from. Usually the criminals want to be able to receive responses. So you can look at the reply to address. Like if you go to reply to the email, it'll show you where it's going. It's also in the email headers for those of you that are a little more technical. And you can see here, the reply to address is a Gmail address. Ah, that's so interesting. The fact that it's different from the from address is telling in and of itself. And the fact that it's some third-party account that anybody could open, that should set off a red flag right there. So check out that reply to address, because the criminals want to get messages back from you. And chances are pretty good that's actually where they sent the email from. All right, another thing they often do is fake the from name. So the email might actually not match the name. Again, when those things don't match, that's a clear indicator that this is a fake email. If you hover your mouse over keep current password, you'll see it's also totally illegitimate, not an Office 365 address. Also, they might pick a similar domain to what they're trying to target, so we can see them replacing L's with ones. Or instead of example.com, it's example.co.uk. Or sometimes they're really sneaky and they use a .org instead of a .com, or they might use a .net. Here's one example of a fake email. Your Apple ID has been suspended, and it looks like it's coming from Apple, and they're going to have a link for you to click to unsuspend your account, but in reality, this actually comes from apple.ssl.co.uk. Weird. That is not the real Apple, clearly. The last thing they might actually do is hack a real email account. So this is one we saw coming in from a vendor, and it was a vendor that we had not dealt with for a long time, so that's why it immediately tripped some red flags. Or it showed us some red flags, and it says, good morning, please find attached the requested payment invoice. So this vendor had been hacked, and the criminals were using their email to blast out invoices to all of their customers, and they're hoping that you're going to pay that. Or maybe they're hoping to infect you with malware. It's typically one or the other. So make sure that you're being careful. Even if an email comes from somebody that you expect, it may not be legitimate. I always look for, try to make sure that a request is expected. If the request is unexpected, that also should raise some alarm bells. And it's important to train everybody on your finance team to notice that. Okay, so how do we spot a fraudulent email? Check to see if the sender's address is correct. If it's not, make sure it's really check carefully. If it's not, that's a red flag. Look to see if the reply to address is different than the sender address. Look for that sense of urgency. An elevated sense of urgency is a really common indicator. See if the request is expected or unexpected. If it's unexpected, that's a red flag as well. If the sender says, I am only available by email, again, don't fall for it. Contact them through some other method. And any request for financial information or a change in where a payment gets sent, that should also require another level of verification. All right, so let's talk about our final piece, how we actually protect our accounts. Matt, how are they breaking into our accounts? And fill us in about this a little bit. What are we looking at on the screen?
So this is from the StackX market. StackX is a marketplace that's built for buying and selling access to email accounts and for facilitating other kinds of financial fraud. So we have a couple of listings here that kind of stuck out to us. First off, for $140, you can get 50,000 email leads that you can use for a spam campaign that are all guaranteed to be CEOs or owners of companies. Seems like a pretty good target to go after, right? We also have logins to individual accounts. These are tested, these are marked as fresh, and they're usually guaranteed by the seller to be fully functional at that point in time. And they're cheap. They're only about $7 a piece at this point, which is not a lot of money based on how much you could get back out of an account if you're able to successfully pull off a financial fraud. Now, rather than just buy accounts, a lot of times attackers will buy large-scale batches of email addresses and passwords put together. And why would somebody do this, and why are these so popular on dark web marketplaces? Well, easy. These can be used for credential stuffing attacks because a lot of people reuse passwords. That's a common problem that we run into. So in this case, you see an advertisement here. This is 593 million email address and password combinations. That's a lot of data to give to an adversary for them to go out and basically test anywhere they can. Odds are good there's going to be some successful pairs in there, even if this is an old list. Again, a lot of people reuse passwords. A lot of people use weak passwords. In a recent breach analysis that we were looking at, we saw millions of people still using the word password as a password. So again, this is not something that's new or is necessarily going to change at any point in time soon, despite our best efforts. So what can criminals actually do with this kind of information, and why is it so valuable? Well, credential stuffing attacks are a big thing that criminals will use this information for. Again, they'll steal your passwords or just buy them off the dark web or get them for free off a dark web forum, and then they'll try them anywhere they can. Sherry alluded to this a little bit earlier, but this is everything. This isn't just your email. This is your PayPal account. This is your e-commerce account, so Amazon or eBay. This is your online banking account, your social media. They will try them everywhere they can, and any chance they have to gain access to more information about someone just increases their chances of being able to successfully pull off this fraud. We've talked about this quote before, but Brent Arsenault from Microsoft put it very well. Hackers don't break in, they log in. So they're not using sophisticated attacks against you. They're not using any kind of 0 days. They're just getting usernames and passwords and seeing where they work. So Sherry, how can we stop this from being a problem?
Yeah, if you're using the same password for email that you use for anything else, that puts you at risk. Even if it's similar, hackers have tools where they can try variations on that. And that's why it's so important to use a unique password for every website that you use. And if that gives you heart palpitations, you are not alone. As we've talked about before, the human brain is not designed to remember 200 different passwords that are all complicated and long and have numbers and letters and squirrel noises. So we need software to do that for us. That is what password managers are for. They can dramatically reduce your risk should you choose to deploy them and use them correctly. So use a password manager. They're pretty inexpensive. They range from $4 to $7 per month per user. So a pretty small investment considering the protection they offer. Make sure your passwords are difficult to guess. I strongly recommend using the password generator function because the passwords that we come up with our human brains are often much easier to guess than those that the system can randomly generate. Also, I often get the question, can password managers be hacked or are they safe to use and do they improve security as we believe? And the answer is yes, absolutely they do, especially if you use them correctly. So use them to create a unique password for every account. Cloud-based password managers can automatically fill these in for you even if you're using different devices. And bonus, they can also resist keystroke loggers. So if your computer gets infected and an attacker has a foothold on your system, even if they are capturing passwords as you type them in, many password managers have built-in protections that will help to thwart keystroke loggers. Are they perfect? No. We've certainly seen situations where password managers get hacked, or your account that you use to manage all your passwords can get hacked as well. And that's why it's really important to use multi-factor authentication to protect your passwords. So if you're going to put all your eggs in one basket, secure that basket, use multi-factor authentication for your login to LastPass or Dashlane or whatever other password manager you're using. And if you use it correctly to have unique passwords, to generate different passwords, and you have multi-factor authentication, then they will dramatically improve your security and reduce your risk at a very low cost. So I strongly recommend it. All right, Matt, tell us about the Robinhood hack.
Yeah, Robinhood just announced that 7 million of their individual users' email addresses and names were exposed. Now, if you're not familiar with Robinhood, Robinhood is a financial services application. It's used for trading stocks, trading cryptocurrency, and there is a lot of potential for misuse of that if access to that application for an individual is gained by someone who, well, isn't supposed to have access to it. Now, when they were taken over, Robinhood just let us know that names and email addresses were the big things that were leaked, and by themselves, that doesn't seem like it'd be too big of an issue. But when you think about it, again, this is a financial services application. So now an attacker has the email address and name of 7 million individual users of this financial app. This can be used for targeted spear phishing. It can be used for password brute forcing attempts to gain access to the platform. And there's a lot of other bad stuff that can happen because of it. So even that little bit of data getting out is a problem.
Yeah, you were then the target of potential phishing attacks, just like we talked about earlier with DocuSign. And even if you have unique passwords for every account, if the criminals manage to phish you and get that one password, then they could potentially just log right into your email or any other account you're using. So it's really important to use multi-factor authentication. Sorry to sound like a broken record, guys, but this is the #1 most important security tool that you need to be using today, especially on your email. Remember, email is the keys to the kingdom. So use multi-factor authentication. Authentication means how we verify someone's identity, and there's 3 ways to do that: something you know, something you have, something you are. And when we talk about using multi-factor authentication, we mean using more than one method. So when, not if, one of your passwords gets stolen, criminals can't just log into your account. There's something else preventing them from doing that. We really like authenticator apps. I think that they're a cheap and very effective way to implement multi-factor authentication. This is an app typically on your phone, which can provide you with a code to type in, or even more conveniently, it can pop up an alert and say, is this you trying to log in? And you prove you have that device by clicking yes or no. Free apps include Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator. You can also take advantage of some additional bells and whistles in commercial tools like Duo and other platforms. YubiKey is also another great option. It's the Swiss Army knife of security, so you can use it to do multi-factor authentication with fingerprints or with keys or with NFC. So take a peek at that if you want that extra level of security having a hardware token. All right, not all multi-factor authentication is created equal, as Matt talked about in last month's webinar on passwords and authentication. Just wanted to touch on that. It's very easy for hackers to steal your text messages, SMS messages. There are just some flaws in the cellular network. They can either pretend that they're you and that they've gotten a new phone and get your telecommunications provider to just change where your texts are going, or hackers can actually pay SMS enablement services. And we saw a great report on that this spring, where a reporter got a hacker to pay an SMS enablement service $16 to get copies of all his texts. So unfortunately, text messages are not secure. They're better than nothing if that's all you have, but it's really important to use multi-factor authentication, ideally using an app or a hardware token like RSA or YubiKey. Any multi-factor authentication, though, is better than no multi-factor authentication. Pick strong passwords. Strong passwords are unique passwords. Use a password manager program, and then make sure that you're protecting your password. Don't share it. Don't store it in files on your computer, as we've talked about in the past. All right, we've traveled a long road today. We talked about how criminals get money from your email. They're going to monetize it once they get access. We actually showed you how they do that in action from our laboratory. We talked about how to detect and respond to email hacking, how to spot fraudulent emails that are often associated with financial crime and email hacks, and then how to protect your account so this doesn't happen in the first place. Here's a checklist of our top tips. Make sure everybody's doing out-of-band verification. Protect your account with multi-factor authentication, good password hygiene, choose unique passwords and use a password manager. Check your emails carefully for any signs of fraud. And if you do think you or someone else has been hacked, respond quickly.
Thanks so much, Sherry. And yeah, if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to get a hold of us. We are Sherry Davidoff and Matt Duran from LMG Security. You can email us at info@lmgsecurity.com, find us on Twitter, follow us on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in ransomware, cyber, and cyber extortion, check out our new book that comes out beginning of next year.
Great. Thank you so much, Sherry and Matt, for your wonderful presentation today. Again, if you have any questions, please submit them using the Q&A tab in the webinar interface. Let's start with this one. How can I tell if my password has been stolen?
Yeah, great question. You may not know right away if your password gets stolen. In fact, if you use a password on a cloud site and the cloud vendor doesn't know they've been hacked, it could be months or even years before you find out. So there's a couple things you can do. Number one, it's a good idea to check now and then and see if your password is part of any known data breaches. There's a website, haveibeenpwned.com, which is very useful for checking. I would not recommend you type your actual password in there, but you can type your email in and they'll show you all the different breaches that involve your email. So that's one very helpful method. Also, just keep an eye on access to your accounts. If there are any red flags or indicators that someone else besides you may have logged in, then take that very seriously, even if they didn't do anything. It's so easy to go about our day and just ignore those warning signs until something bigger happens weeks or months down the road. So pay attention to the little signs that we shared with you today and take action when it's appropriate.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question, what if I use a cloud app that doesn't offer MFA?
Yeah, so not all cloud applications offer multi-factor authentication, unfortunately. So step one is, if you can, use one that does offer multi-factor authentication, and hopefully that financial pressure from customers will get other cloud vendors to start offering this capability. If you really need to use a cloud provider and they really don't offer multi-factor authentication, then that's certainly very risky. Again, make sure that they are aware that that's a concern for you. Also, make sure you use a really great password that you don't use other places, because there is no second barrier protecting your accounts in the event that your password does get stolen. And finally, check that account very carefully for any signs of compromise and respond quickly.
Thank you. Let's see, we'll end with this question. Is passwordless authentication worth implementing?
I can take this one. So yeah, passwordless authentication is kind of the next step in the evolution of the password. And really what we're doing is we're shifting the emphasis in the something you have, something you know, and something you are kind of triad of authentication into the something you have and something you are kind of form of that. Passwordless authentication can rely on a number of different items like cookies saved within your browser or specific hardware configurations on your computer, but it's not a silver bullet. It is easier than remembering a password. It is oftentimes harder to hijack that information, but it's still possible. So even in the case where we're using passwordless authentication, we also want to have a second step involved. So like SAML authentication, for an example, will allow you to authenticate based on a trusted device, but we also want to have that paired up with a multi-factor authentication service like Duo to make sure that we're maintaining that security level.
Great, thank you, Matt. Thank you to both of you for such a great presentation today. Once again, my name is Natalie Adams with LMG Security. We would like to thank everyone who attended today's webinar. Please take a moment to fill out the survey afterwards and let us know what you thought. The recorded video from this presentation and the handouts will be made available to attendees, and we will send out a notification once they are live. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.